This podfic contains content that may be disturbing for some viewers, including mentions of violence, guns, and physical and emotional abuse. Please check out the complete list of content warnings in the description, and proceed with caution if you are sensitive to these topics. Hello, my lovely little gemstones, it's Saphira, and today I'll be reading When the Chips Are Down by Whiskey with Patron. Chapter 9. Cool. Now I'm going to cry. Virgil wanted more than anything to go back home. He sat in Roman and Remus's pillow fort and kept reading Fahrenheit 451, thanks to DW. He munched on the chips she'd brought them as he read, grateful that at least she was putting in some effort. He knew Remus might not be comfortable around her for a while, for his own reasons, but Virgil personally saw no problem with her. That didn't mean he trusted her, though. He lost track of time as the twins played with their toys and ate cookies. Eventually, when someone yanked back the blanket over the entrance of the fort, he jumped in surprise and almost threw his book at them. Mr. Chimera peered into the fort. "It's time to leave, if that's all right with the three of you." Virgil just narrowed his eyes at him. He didn't want to talk to this guy any more than he had to. Roman and Remus, however, seemed to have gotten over Janus snapping at them earlier. "Where are we going?" Remus asked eagerly. "Back to my house," Mr. Chimera answered. "For your sake, I will limit the time we spend here in the office, so most of your time will be spent at my place." He let the blanket cover the entrance again. Virgil heard his footsteps walk back across the room. Virgil glanced at the page number he was on and shut his book. He would have been perfectly content to stay here for the rest of the day. He didn't want to go to some new location where there might be new people. Oh God, what if Mr. Chimera was married and had kids? Then Virgil and the twins would be intruding on their lives, and Virgil would have to introduce himself to them, and they might even think he's weird because of all the piercings Patton had let him get, and his purple hair and all his weird fidgeting habits, and they might even judge Patton for letting Remus bleach a streak in his hair at such a young age, and he felt a hand on his knee and looked up. Roman sat next to him with a smile on his face. "It's okay," Roman said. "Nothing's wrong. We're just going somewhere else." Virgil took a deep breath. Roman was right. Everything was okay right now. Nothing bad was happening in this moment. He slung his backpack straps over his shoulders and clutched the book DW lent him close to his chest. He put his bat pendant in his mouth and crawled out of the fort alongside Remus. Mr. Chimera was busy placing folders and papers into a briefcase on his desk. He closed it and latched it shut before grabbing the handle and holding it at his side. He strode to the door without a word. Roman and Remus scurried after him. Virgil hesitated, unwilling to follow this guy anywhere, but he didn't have much of a choice. He gnawed on his bat pendant and followed him, clutching his backpack straps tight. Mr. Chimera held the door open for the twins. He kept it open until Virgil left his office, then pushed it shut. "DW, are you ready to leave?" DW stood up from her desk, her own briefcase in hand. "Yep, you let Maggie know she's in charge?" Mr. Chimera nodded. "Come on," he said to the kids, walking to the door. Virgil turned to DW as she followed after Janus. He opened his mouth to ask if he should give her book back, but he swallowed the words before they were out of his mouth. It sounded like a stupid question. Of course he would have to give it back. It was hers, after all. He couldn't just keep it. He set the book on the corner of her desk and hurried after the group. He glanced down at the yellow snake pin he'd put on his sweater earlier. He didn't really want to wear something that associated him with this weird business, but if it would keep him more or less safe, he might as well keep it on. He just wasn't sure if it was supposed to stay in this place or if he was allowed to wear it outside. He covered it up with his backpack strap, just in case. They left DW's office. Mr. Chimera led them down the hallway directly in front of them, and Virgil glanced into the corridors that branched off from this one as they passed. "What exactly is this place?" Virgil asked before he realized what he was saying. Mr. Chimera glanced back at him. "Pardon?" Virgil gulped, anxiety flaring, but he took a deep breath to calm himself. "This clearly isn't just a banking business. What's with all these halls down here?" Mr. Chimera turned back around to face the front. "Living quarters," he answered. "We have employees who prefer to live here for their own safety." "Is this the only floor below the bank?" Virgil asked. Janus paused. "No." He didn't elaborate further. Virgil watched as Roman and Remus excitedly ran down the hall. Virgil hoped Remus's leg wouldn't give out from all the running and walking he'd done today. They reached a set of elevator doors at the end of the hallway. A couple people stood in front of them, chatting amongst themselves. They spotted Mr. Chimera and nodded in greeting. Virgil gave both of them a quick once-over. Neither person was dressed like they should be working in a bank. One wore a white leather jacket, bright yellow snake printed on the back, which clashed with her purple hair and its pigtails. The other wore her dark hair in a tight ponytail that rested on the shoulder of her black polo shirt. A blue necktie accentuated the outfit. He wouldn't have given her a second thought, but a holster rested on her hip with a gun tucked into it. Oddly enough, her face looked a little like Mr. Minder's. Her outfit looked like what he usually wore too, minus the gun. The woman with the gun turned and left with a nod of acknowledgement at the group. The lady with the purple hair bounced on her feet, which Virgil only just now noticed were covered by knee-high white boots. A purple skirt swished around her legs. Mr. Chimera pushed a button on the elevator. "Hello, Moggy," he said to the woman. The lady turned to look at him, and Virgil caught a glimpse of her face. Purple makeup covered her eyes, and her red lips stretched into a smile. "Hey there, Janny. You said you need someone to hold down the fort while you're gone?" Her eyes drifted across the kids, and she rolled around to face them with an excited gasp. "Oh, you must be the darling things he mentioned in his email. Aren't you the cutest things?" Remus flinched at her loud voice and hid behind Virgil. Mr. Chimera cleared his throat. "Miss Sailor, we're going to be spending more time at my house. Are you able to carry out some simple duties in my absence?" "Well, sure thing, Janny. You can count on me." The elevator doors opened. Janus ushered Roman and Remus in. DW followed, and Virgil reluctantly stepped in after them. He placed himself between Remus and Miss Sailor, just to help Remus feel a bit safer. Miss Sailor pushed one of many buttons. Virgil stared at all the numbers, wondering just how many floors there were in this place. "You don't have to worry about a thing," Miss Sailor said to Janus. "I'll take care of everything while you're busy." A hand tugged on Miss Sailor's jacket. Virgil glanced down to see Roman standing next to her, staring upward as if transfixed by her hair. Roman let go of her jacket and pointed up at Virgil. "You have the same hair." Miss Sailor turned to Virgil, and his anxiety made his entire body tense at the thought of interacting with someone he only just met. She smiled even wider, which Virgil didn't think was possible. "Well, look at that!" she exclaimed. "We sure do! Lovely dye job, by the way. Who did that, if you don't mind me asking?" Virgil fiddled with his sleeves, looking anywhere but her eyes. "Did it myself." His voice was hardly a whisper compared to her excited chatter. He silently cursed himself for not speaking louder. "Wow, you are skilled," she chirped. She lifted one ponytail. "I don't think I could have done this on my own." The elevator doors opened. Virgil found himself walking closer to DW as they stepped out into a well-lit room. It only took him a moment to realize that they had ended up in the main bank area, just behind the counter. Miss Sailor walked over to one of the empty teller chairs. "Have fun, Janny! Let me know if you need anything else." Mr. Chimera skirted around the corner and made a beeline for the door. DW and the others trailed after him. Roman smiled and waved at Maggie, and she waved back as they passed. Virgil kept his grip tight on his backpack strap and stuck his bat necklace back into his mouth. A dozen scenarios wandered through his head. Did Mr. Chimera have any family living at home with him? Would they hate Virgil and the twins? Would he devolve into a cruel, anger-fueled asshole the second they were out of the workplace? Would he just dump the kids in a random room and leave them to their own devices with no help at all? They left the building. Mr. Chimera led them around to the parking lot in the back. Virgil felt Roman grab his hand and give it a reassuring squeeze, which did help to ease his anxiety a little, but it also made him feel a little pathetic. He was 15 years old. He should be able to handle himself. He shouldn't need an 11-year-old to reassure him like this. They approached a sleek black car, the same one Virgil had seen DW exit when she pulled up to the Starbucks earlier that day. DW went around to the driver's side as Mr. Chimera approached the passenger door. He grabbed the door handle of the back of the car and opened it. He stepped aside, holding the door open like he was some sort of chauffeur. "Come on, then," he prompted. Rowan and Remus dashed for the open door. Mr. Chimera flinched back in surprise as Remus leaped into the back seat, followed by an equally excited Roman. Virgil couldn't suppress a snicker at his startled face. Virgil hefted his bag and trudged to the car. He didn't spare Mr. Chimera a second glance as he slid into the seat. As Mr. Chimera shut the door and sat in the passenger seat next to DW, it gave Virgil a moment to process just how nice the inside of the car was. The leather seats were probably the most comfortable thing he'd ever sat on. He had so much legroom between his seat and Mr. Chimera's, he could stretch his legs out all the way. There was an outlet in front of the middle seat so they could plug in their phones if needed, and the air conditioner must have been going earlier because it was nice and cool inside the car. He hated it. He hunched his shoulders and sank into his seat with a scowl. He wished he could have been in Patton's old station wagon, with its worn-out seats that had been used countless times to take Roman and Remus to drama club, and its AC that broke every summer, and its radio that didn't work half the time, so Virgil would plug in his own music to listen to while Patton was driving. This was unfamiliar and strange. It felt like no one had inhabited the back seat of this car in ages. DW pulled the car out of the parking lot and into the street. Remus, who was sitting in the other window seat, turned his attention to the window in the door. He flicked the switch back and forth, rolling the window up and down. He always did the same in Patton's vehicle, a constant habit. Virgil gazed out the window as they drove through the streets. He hardly ever came uptown. More stores lined the sidewalk, and they even passed by a couple malls. The downtown area was a bit less populated from what he saw. There were more diners and cafes than chain restaurants, and smaller local stores rather than chain stores and malls. It was a lot nicer downtown. He didn't like being here in this busy part of the city. It didn't take long to reach their destination. They ended up driving out to the edge of town to an area that was taken up by huge houses, so big that he could probably classify them as mansions. He spotted one with a 3-car garage and a front lawn bigger than Dad's entire house. Rich people always have to take up as much room as they could, didn't they? They drove into the cul-de-sac and pulled into the driveway of one of the slightly smaller mansions. DW parked the car and opened her door. "We're here." Virgil opened his door and stepped out of the car. He gazed up at the house in front of them. It was 2 stories high, painted white with a wraparound porch. 2 beautiful columns framed the steps that led to the doorway, as well as a balcony on the second floor, right above the porch. 2 more columns held up the roof over the corners of the porch. There were 4 windows on each side of the front of the house, each one with a set of shutters. A flower bed traced the house below the porch. A variety of flowers sprouted from the dirt, providing a pop of color from the otherwise colorless house. DW and Mr. Chimera grabbed their briefcases from the back of the car and made their way to the door. Roman and Remus hurried after them, but Virgil hesitated. This place didn't look like home. He couldn't see himself actually being able to settle down here, not even for a week. However, he didn't have much of a choice. He trudged forward, chewing on his necklace to calm his nerves. Mr. Chimera pushed the door open and flicked on the light switch. "Welcome to your temporary home," he said. Virgil followed the twins inside. A wide-open, spacious room greeted them. To the left were couches and chairs, with soft pillows and blankets draped all over them. The large windows in the walls were covered by blinds, but sunlight from the setting sun peeked through. To the right were bookshelves, and a TV was propped on a wooden coffee table in the far wall. Directly ahead across the room was a hallway with 1 door at the end and 2 others, 1 in each wall to the sides. Another door sat in the wall off to the right, and another one was in the wall perpendicular to it, next to the hallway. Roman's mouth fell open as soon as they stepped inside. "Oh my God, you live in a castle," he whispered. DW smiled. "Well, it's not the biggest castle, but it works for us." "Is it only the 2 of you?" Virgil asked. He stared down the hallway, half expecting someone to walk through the door at the end. "Sometimes," Mr. Chimera answered, which didn't really ease Virgil's nerves. Mr. Chimera set his briefcase down next to one of the couches. "DW can show you to your bedrooms while I get started on dinner." He walked down the hallway and disappeared into the door on the left. DW walked across the room to the right, towards the door next to the hall. "Come on, kiddos." Virgil stiffened at the nickname. Dad always called them kiddos, and as far as he was concerned, he was the only one who was allowed to call them that. He kept his mouth shut and just followed her to the door. Roman and Remus ran after her, all too eager to explore this new place they had found themselves in. DW opened the door and the kids followed her through. They ended up in a dining room. A decent-sized table took up most of the room. Directly to the right was another door. DW led them through and they ended up in a stairwell. The stairs led upward and took a sharp turn to the left. Remus's shoulders slumped when he saw the stairs. "My knee hurts," he whispered. Virgil didn't think he could carry Remus up a flight of stairs, but he held out his arms. "I got you, Ree." Remus raised his arms and let Virgil hoist him up. Virgil struggled a little with the weight, but he tried not to show how much effort it took to lift Remus. He started up the stairs after DW, who was already on the landing at the turn in the stairs. Roman ran ahead of the 2 to catch up with DW. "I'm sorry," Remus muttered. "It's okay, Remus," Virgil reassured him. "I don't mind." Remus rested his chin on Virgil's shoulder. "Dad could do this if he was here." He wrapped his arms tighter around Virgil. "I don't like this guy. Why couldn't Remy take care of us?" Virgil swallowed. How was he supposed to answer that? "It's complicated," he said finally. "Dad's in some trouble, and Mr. Chimera is going to keep us safe until Dad comes back. Remy is trying to keep Dad safe." He reached the landing and looked up at DW, who had already reached the top of the stairs. DW glanced behind her to see if they were behind her. She set her briefcase down and started back down the stairs towards them. "Oh, sorry, I can help if you need—" "I got him," Virgil interrupted, feeling Remus tense up in his arms. Remus clearly didn't want to be close to her. Virgil wasn't going to hand him off to her just because she could carry him easier. DW picked up her case and walked back up the stairs, where Roman was waiting. They reached the top of the stairs and turned to the left. A short hallway stretched ahead of them, a door on either side. It led into another open living space. DW set her briefcase next to the door on the left and continued out into the living area. Virgil and Roman followed. A door stood in the opposite wall, leading out to the small balcony at the front of the house. The living space was smaller than the one downstairs, but it still housed its fair share of couches and armchairs. 2 doors sat in each wall to the left and right. DW glanced to the 4 doors. Those are the bedrooms. Those ones are smaller, she said, pointing to the doors to the right of the room. So I don't know if you guys all want your own rooms or if you want to stick together. We got it, Virgil interrupted. He sat Remus down. I'll take a smaller one. You two stick together. Roman and Remus exchanged a glance that Virgil couldn't quite decipher. You sure? Roman asked. Virgil nodded and hefted his backpack. I'll be fine. Go get settled. Roman and Remus seemed to hesitate a little, but they turned and walked side by side to one of the bigger bedrooms. Virgil started for the smaller rooms, but was pulled to a stop by his backpack. He whirled around and DW let go of his bag. Listen, kid, she said, her voice soft as if he was a piece of glass that might shatter if she spoke too loud. I know the situation is scary, and it's going to take a while to adjust. You don't have to be afraid to ask for help. If you don't want to talk to Janus, that's fine. You can always come see me if you have a problem. My room is just down there. She pointed down the hall to the door she'd set her briefcase in front of. I'll be there if you ever need me during the night. With that, she turned and walked to her room. Virgil stood there, wondering why she was being so open to helping him. He only met her that day. Was she trying to be condescending? He couldn't tell. He walked to the bedroom across from Remus and Roman's. He opened the door. Inside the room, the walls were all white, as were the sheets and comforter on the bed. A wooden dresser sat off to the side next to the closet doors. It was completely empty, void of any sign of life. He stared at it. The thought of staying in this blank room in this house made an awful feeling settle in his stomach. This wasn't home. He had left his home in favor of this washed-out, lifeless mansion. He didn't know where Dad was or if he was even alive. Roman and Remus would have to adjust with Dad's permanent absence if he died. All of their personal belongings were left behind in their home, their real home, not this rich person's empty mansion. Virgil reached into his pocket and took out the letter Dad had given him. He still hadn't read the rest of it. He wasn't even sure if he wanted to. If Dad turned up dead in a few weeks, Virgil didn't want to waste his last words to him right now. Knowing this letter might be the last time Dad would ever speak to Virgil made that bad feeling in his gut grow more intense. Everything had been fine just yesterday. It was just a normal day. Dad made pancakes for breakfast with Roman's help. Remus had insisted they all go out to the nearest diner for lunch, and Virgil and Dad had made homemade pizza for supper. Virgil had watched 3 Disney movies in a row with Roman and gone outside to play with Remus that afternoon. Dad had put them all in bed that night with his usual smile and kiss on the forehead. Nothing had been different. Nothing had warned them about this sudden, drastic change, the danger they would all be in, the people they would be stuck with. Virgil took off his backpack and dropped it on the floor. He leaned against the closed door, holding Dad's letter close to his chest as the knot in his stomach gnarled and twisted itself into something awful. Now that he was alone, all the bad feelings he'd been suppressing all day bubbled up to the surface. He missed Dad. He wanted to go home. He wanted to take Roman and Remus out of this place, go find Dad, and drive home in Dad's old station wagon while blasting MCR from the speakers. Tears welled up in his eyes. He wiped them away, but once they were out, it was like a dam broke inside of him. His breath hitched with sudden sobs. He put a hand over his mouth in an attempt to stifle them, but he couldn't stop crying now that he'd started. He slid to the floor and curled into a ball, as if that would stop the dread settling into his gut. Why did this have to happen now? Why did this have to happen at all? He pulled his hood over his head and clutched Dad's letter in both hands, careful not to fold or crinkle the paper too much. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, vaguely aware that it would smudge his eyeshadow. He didn't want to be here. He wanted to find Dad. He didn't even know if Dad was alive or if the people he was running from had found him and killed him. Or maybe they had found him and hadn't killed him yet. They were doing something worse, something awful and painful. Virgil choked out a sob at the thought. He set the letter aside so it wouldn't get crumpled and instead grabbed his backpack. He folded his legs crisscross applesauce, unzipped his backpack, and grabbed the cat plushie Patton had given him long ago. Roman had named it Miss Snuffles the moment he saw it, and just the memory of that, when they were all together as a family, made Virgil want to cry harder. He hugged Mrs. Snuffles and let the tears fall. Chapter 10. Cuddling with my hot best friend in bed is totally platonic. Patton could not stop worrying. He couldn't stop worrying when Thomas showed him and Remy to the guest room. He couldn't stop worrying when Remy went outside to move his motorcycle into the garage. He couldn't stop worrying when Thomas went out alone to get supper from the nearest fast food place. Patton could tell Remy was starting to get concerned for him. Patton couldn't blame him. It must have been concerning to see Patton so uncharacteristically anxious. But Patton couldn't help it. His kiddos were more or less safe, but he didn't know how they would adjust to living with Janus. Would Janus get annoyed by Remus's habitual tics and his inability to walk for too long? What about Roman's sensitive emotions? Not to mention Virgil's anxiety, along with his near-constant stimming and occasional meltdowns. He didn't adjust well to change either, so he might get angry and snap at Janus, and who knows how Janus would react to that? Then there was the ever-present threat of Wrath's blade lurking around the corner. If they hadn't followed the kids to Chimera, they certainly had people stationed nearby that would have at least seen the kids go in. There was no doubt in his mind that they knew exactly where his kiddos were, and who was to stop them from trying to break in and grab the kids so they could keep them hostage until Patton gave himself up? "You okay there, Padre?" Patton jumped and looked behind him. Andy sat on the kitchen counter, a container of chicken nuggets in her lap. She stared at Patton with a confused sort of curiosity. Patton gave her a polite smile. "I'm fine, thanks for asking." Remy glanced up from the TV screen, which was showing an episode of The Office. "Darling, you do not look okay," he said. "You look like shit." "Really? I thought I looked like a dad," Patton said automatically. Thomas snorted from where he sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. "Good one." Remy sighed and rolled his eyes. "Thomas, honey, Patton's bad jokes aren't the issue here." Remy took a french fry from his container and pointed it at Patton. "Pat, you need to relax for a bit. The issue with your kids is currently out of your hands. We can't contact Mr. Chimera. We can't contact your kids. We can't go back to the city and pick them up to take them with us. We can't do anything. There is nothing we can do. We've made the decision to come here, and we need to settle into it. Let's just watch The Office and chill out, okay, babe? Now eat your onion rings or I'll eat them for you." Patton looked down at the little bag of onion rings in his hands. He didn't feel like eating. He felt like running all the way back to the city himself to be with his kiddos. His left index finger twitched as his anxiety spiked. He clenched his fist to stop it. Patton dejectedly munched on his food and tried to focus on whatever the heck was happening on the TV screen. Thomas seemed totally invested in the show. Patton wouldn't be surprised if the guy completely forgot he had company. Andy was ignoring the show, gaze fixated instead on the screen of her laptop. Remy seemed less invested in the show and more interested in Thomas. It was hard for Patton to keep his attention on the show when no one else but Thomas seemed to be paying attention to it. He finished off his food and stood up, his fast food wrappers in hand. "Thomas, sorry to be a bad guest, but would it be all right if I went to bed now?" Thomas looked up at Patton and blinked as if he'd forgotten he was even there. "Oh, yeah, sure, go ahead. You can shower if you want. Bathroom's right across from the guest room." Patton stepped past Remy and walked to the stairs. He muttered a quick apology as he skirted around Thomas, but Thomas didn't seem to notice or care. Patton trudged up the stairs, clutching his black denim jacket around his shoulders. He hadn't taken it off, nor had he taken off his backpack. If he had to run, he didn't want to be forced to leave his stuff behind. He walked down the hall to the room Thomas had prepared for Patton and Remy. He flicked on the light switch. It was a fairly small room, but it would work for them. He took off his backpack, tossed it to the floor, and threw his food wrappers into the trash can. He might as well shower while he was relatively safe. He didn't know if he would get a chance later if he had to run away. He told himself he would only have a short shower as he stripped off his clothes in the bathroom. However, as soon as he stepped under the warm water, all the tension that had built up in his muscles seemed to wash away down the drain. He was safe, at least for now. He could afford to have a shower longer than 5 minutes. He took a much-needed breath and leaned against the wall, letting the water wash over him. He had been so unprepared to go on the run like this. He wished he had more time to mentally steel himself for this situation. Of course, he knew it would happen eventually. He would have to be stupid to think he could ever escape from Wrath. It was inevitable that they would track him down. He guessed he just managed to trick himself into thinking everything was fine, that maybe Wrath wouldn't come for him, and he could live peacefully with his kiddos. God, what an absolute fool he'd been to believe that lie. He ran a hand through his hair. All the anxiety he felt earlier left him with one great sigh of relief, leaving him weary and tired. He absently scratched at his left shoulder. It was his fault Remy was in danger with him, and the thought sent a pang of guilt through his heart. Patton could have just run off on his own. He didn't need to drag Remy into this. Patton shook his head. No, he didn't need to wallow in guilt right now. He just needed to relax. He scrubbed some soap over his shoulders and took a deep breath. He was fine right now. He didn't have to worry about Virgil or the twins or Janus or Remy or Wrath. All he had to do was chill out and settle into the decision he'd made. A dull pain throbbed in his left shoulder and he winced. He glanced at it. He hadn't realized he was scrubbing his shoulder so hard. The skin was red and raw. He ran his hands through his hair instead. He should probably get out. He didn't know how long he'd had the water running. He shut off the water and stepped out. He let his mind wander as he dried off and got dressed. He tried not to focus on wrath or anything else that might trouble him, but it was hard not to as he wrapped himself in a towel and made his way back to the room he was sharing with Remy. He was more than ready to go to bed after the long day he'd had. He rummaged through his backpack and grabbed a t-shirt. He would have loved to bring his cat onesie, but he didn't have room for it. He pulled on the clean shirt and a pair of boxers, then sat down on the bed. He would either sleep like a baby tonight or not be able to sleep at all for fear of Wrath finding him. There was no way to tell. His thoughts might just keep him awake, but he couldn't help it. Wrath might have followed them here. Maybe Wrath had found them and was just waiting for everyone to go to sleep so they could attack Patton while he was off his guard. What would they do with him then? Kill him? Demand ransom money to set him free? Torture him? Try to use him against Chimera somehow? The endless possibilities were all horrible. He stood and walked to the window. He peeked out from behind the curtains to glance outside. He didn't see anyone nearby. That was good, at least. He spotted a tiny glowing speck outside below the window. He squinted and saw the dark silhouette of a person holding the glowing dot. Patton unlocked the window and opened it. "Hey, Remy. Smoking something off?" Remy looked up and lowered a cigarette. Smoke trailed from his mouth, and he grinned when Patton's joke landed. "Nah, Thomas is still watching The Office. The guy's hypnotized by it, I swear. Impossible to flirt with him when he's only got eyes for John Krasinski." Patton shrugged. "Fair." He waved away a cloud of smoke that drifted upwards. "You feeling okay, Pat?" Remy asked. He took a long inhale of his cigarette. "You seem really on edge." Patton snorted at the absurdity of the question. Why wouldn't I be on edge? "Fair point." He blew a plume of smoke in from his mouth. "You want to talk about anything?" Patton sighed and ran a hand through his hair. There were a few things he was worried about, but he didn't want to dump everything onto Remy all at once. "I'm worried about being on the run," Patton admitted. He didn't want to disclose anything else. Besides, Remy probably already figured that he was worried about Virgil and Janus and the twins. "What about it is worrying you? I mean, aside from the obvious." Patton's left pointer finger twitched again. I don't know. I just don't want anyone to catch up to us. Wrath could find us. Maybe Chimera could even come after us if Janus doesn't want to deal with the kids. The cops might come after us, too." Remy gave him a sympathetic smile. "Pat, babe, I know things are stressful right now, but you can chill. We're safe." He took a drag from his cigarette. "Would it make you feel better if I came inside?" Patton hesitated. It would make him feel better. Remy was outside and anyone could see him, but Patton didn't want to be a bother. However, Remy must have understood the look on his face. "I'll be right there, hon." He stamped out his cigarette and turned to the door. Patton retreated from the window and pushed it shut. He felt bad interrupting Remy, but with all the concerning thoughts swimming around in his head, he didn't want to be alone. He needed someone to be there and tell him everything was going to be fine, even if it wasn't. The bedroom door swung open and Remy strolled in. "Get in bed, babe. You need your rest." Patton sat on the bed with a sigh. "Thanks, Rem." "No prob, honey." He shucked off his jacket and tossed it next to where he'd thrown his bag of snacks earlier. Patton pulled back the covers as Remy took off his jeans. "Rem?" "Yeah?" "Do you think we're going to get out of this alive?" Remy tossed his jeans aside and took his sunglasses off, brow furrowed. Honestly, Pat, I don't know. I mean, I've run from gangs before, but this is a whole crime organization. The morals aren't exactly airtight." He rummaged around in his mess of stuff. "I think we should be fine, but just in case." He grabbed something from the mess and held it up. "I'm keeping this under my pillow." Patton stared at the pistol Remy held in his hand. "Where did you get that?" Remy flicked off the light and sat on the bed. He scooted to the side closest to the wall. "I've had this thing for years, honey. You don't need to know who I got it from." He clicked the safety on and tucked the gun under his pillow. "You still got that knife I gave you?" Patton leaned down and reached into the pocket of his denim jacket. He held up the pocket knife Remy had given him at the gas station earlier. "Put that under your pillow. If anyone sneaks up on us, you're in charge of slicing their head off. Or, just threaten them if murder ain't your thing." Patton shoved the knife under his own pillow. Normally, having weapons around only made him more anxious, but now they made him feel just a little bit safer. Remy slipped under the covers and lied down. "Come on, babe. Bedtime." He patted the pillow on Patton's side of the bed as an invitation. Patton draped the covers over himself and laid down next to Remy. He stared up at the ceiling through the dark. "Rem?" "Yeah, hon?" "Can you just tell me things are going to be okay? Even if you think they aren't, can you just tell me they are?" He felt Remy roll closer and wrap his arms around Patton's waist. "You don't have to worry about a thing, darling," Remy said quietly. "We're going to be perfectly fine. We'll get to go home, and you'll get to be with your kiddos. He snuggled up to Patton and ran a hand through his hair. We're gonna be okay. Patton knew Remy was likely lying, but he listened to Remy's words anyway and told himself it was the truth. He took his glasses off and set them on the nightstand. Remy tangled his fingers in Patton's hair. Patton snuggled into his arms, trying to relax. They were fine. Everything was going to be okay. It had to be okay. Chapter 11. My nerd boyfriend is stupid, and I love him. Janus placed the lasagna dish on top of the stove and took off his oven mitts. DW, he called. Dinner's ready. Footsteps pounded down the hall, and DW burst through the door within seconds. Lasagna? Janus nodded. Dig in, I'll get the children. DW rushed past him to dish up her food. He barely managed to conceal an eye roll as she hurriedly grabbed a plate from the cabinet. He swore that DW loved his cooking more than she loved him. He grabbed his jacket and tie from where he'd draped them over the counter so he could take them back to his room. He had spent the better part of an hour making supper. Hopefully having 3 more people in the house would keep him and DW from having so many leftovers. He walked through the dining room towards the door that led to the stairwell. Oddly enough, he wasn't sure what to say to the children when he went to retrieve them. Was he supposed to formally invite them to dinner? Just yell down the hallway that there was food and wait for them to come scurrying out of their rooms like a pack of hungry rats? He reached the top of the stairs and walked down the hall, tossing his jacket and tie into his room as he passed. He glanced back and forth between the doors on either side of the upstairs living space, wondering which of the kids he should speak to first. The twins might have a better reaction to his presence, but he got the feeling trying to convince Virgil to come downstairs with everyone else would be a bit of a hassle. Maybe he should get Virgil over and done with first. Janus approached the door on the right and knocked. Virgil, dinner is ready. Silence. I'm not hungry, a quiet voice said finally. Janus furrowed his brow. Was it just his imagination, or did it sound like Virgil had been crying? Are you sure? Janus asked. If you like, I can bring something up for— No, Virgil snapped. Janus heard a sniffle from behind the door. Go away. Janus hesitated. Oddly enough, he felt the urge to go inside and check on the kid to make sure he was okay. However, he wouldn't know the first thing about dealing with an upset child. He decided to leave the issue alone. All right, Janus relented. If you're sure. He turned and walked to the other door, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. Roman, Remus, he said as he knocked on it. Dinner is ready. Rapid footsteps ran to the door. It opened a crack and 2 pairs of brown eyes peeked out at him. What are we having? Roman asked. Lasagna. Roman and Remus exchanged a glance that Janus couldn't decipher. They both burst out of the room and hurried down the hall to the door. Janus blinked, taken aback by their energy. They must have been hungry. He followed them down the hall, straightening his hat as he walked. The 2 kids had stopped at the top of the stairs. Janus wondered why they weren't running down to the kitchen, especially since they seemed so excited to get there at first. Roman hopped onto the first step and held a hand up to Remus. Come on. Remus seemed to hesitate, but he took Roman's hand and stepped onto the stairs with his left foot, barely placing any weight onto his right. He followed Roman down the next couple steps that way until Janus caught up to them. He hadn't noticed that one of the twins had a limp. Perhaps that was something in Patton's letter that Janus hadn't quite gotten around to reading yet. He cleared his throat, and the kids both turned to look at him. I can provide some assistance if you need it, he offered. Remus shot a wary glance at Roman, who just nodded. Remus let go of his brother's hand and turned to Janus. He didn't meet Janus's eyes as he raised his arms. With a start, Janus realized that offering his help meant carrying the kid. He wouldn't go back on his offer, however. He leaned down and picked the kid up. Remus wrapped his arms around Janus's neck and his legs around Janus's torso like a koala. Janus straightened, shifting Remus's weight onto his hip. It had been a long time since he'd carried someone, especially a small someone, but it was easier than he remembered. Janus felt a little awkward, but he started down the staircase, being very careful to keep his balance. He didn't want to fall down the stairs when he was carrying a child. Roman stuck close to Janus as they made their way down the stairs. He reached up and grabbed Remus's shirt in one hand, as if making sure Remus wouldn't fall out of Janus's arms. They reached the bottom and Roman let go so he could open the door. Thank you, Roman, Janus said as he stepped off the stairs. They emerged in the dining room. DW was sitting at the table, scarfing lasagna into her mouth at an alarming rate. She paused momentarily to look up at Janus as he and the kids entered the room. Janus glanced at Remus. Would you like me to take you to the kitchen, or can you get there on your own? Remus avoided Janus's gaze. Down, please, he mumbled. Janus leaned down and set Remus on the floor. Remus immediately grabbed Roman's hand, and the two rushed across the room towards the door. Janus smoothed out his shirt. He caught DW still staring and raised an eyebrow. What? DW swallowed her mouthful of food. Nothing. She scooped up the last of her lasagna and stood. I'm going back for seconds, she muttered through a mouthful of food. Janus walked up to her and tried to match her pace so they were walking side by side. Is the meal adequate? DW snorted. Stop using words like adequate. You're starting to sound like Logan. I can't help that his endearing vocabulary is rubbing off on me. Janus nudged the door open and walked across the hall with DW. Have you heard him when he's ranting about philosophy? Unfortunately, yes. She paused and furrowed her brow when they entered the kitchen. Kid? What are you doing? Janus followed her gaze. Roman had grabbed 2 plates from the cabinet and had dished up some food on both. Remus, however, was leaning over the stove to reach the buttons that turned on the oven. He pressed the off button multiple times. The oven is off, Remus, Janus said, a little confused. Janus had turned the oven off before he even went upstairs. Remus skittered away from the stove, clutching his hand close to his chest. His eyes were wide. He stood and stared at them, completely still, like a deer in headlights. Sorry, he said. I didn't mean to. I won't do it again. He took the plate Roman offered him. Janus raised an eyebrow as Roman and Remus hurried to the dining room. That was an interesting development. Janus put that out of his mind and grabbed a plate for himself. There was no use trying to figure out something he didn't understand. He'd read through the rest of Patton's letter later. Dinner was quiet. DW was already on her second helping of food, which she decided to take her time on instead of scarfing it down like a heathen. Roman and Remus sat in their chairs and stayed silent as they picked away at their food. While Roman was making some decent headway with his food, Remus had hardly touched his plate. He didn't look up even once. Janus had just finished his food when he decided he couldn't stand the silence anymore. Remus? Remus looked up from his half-finished meal to stare at Janus with wide eyes. He didn't respond, but Janus had his attention. Is something the matter? Janus inquired. Remus turned his gaze downward again. I'm sorry you had to carry me down the stairs, he mumbled. And I'm sorry I pressed the buttons on the oven. I won't do it again, I promise. Just, please don't. He shrank down in his seat and scratched at his arm under its sleeve. Janus blinked. That's what the kid was worried about? Children. They focused on the littlest things to get concerned about. It was no issue, Janus reassured him. I'm perfectly capable of helping you up and down the stairs whenever you need it. As for the oven, it's no matter to me. It may confuse me, but it doesn't bother me. Remus was silent for a moment. Really? Yes. He stood and picked up his plate. I hope the meal was all right. I mean, it's not like I'm an experienced chef who's had years of practice, but it really has been a while since I've made this. He reached for DW's empty plate. Are you going back for thirds, or should I start dishes? DW stood and took his plate from his hands. No, you did dishes last night. It's my turn. Oh, come on, Dorothy. Surely you know I'm absolutely incapable of washing my own dishes by now. DW picked up her own plate. My turn for dishes. No take-backsies. You are acting like a child. No, you. Janus scoffed. Oh my goodness, fine. I'll bring Virgil some food, see if he wants anything. Sounds good, Jan. DW took the dishes into the kitchen. Janus followed after her. He grabbed a plate from the cabinet and scooped up a serving of food. Janus was supposed to be taking care of these kids, so he was going to at least try to get Virgil to eat something. He carried the plate back to the stairs, shooting a glance at the twins, who seemed to have gotten into a fairly one-sided conversation. He jogged up to the second floor. Before he could knock on Virgil's door, he hesitated. Virgil hadn't wanted to speak to him earlier. It was possible he would just tell Janus to go away again. He knocked on the door. Virgil, he said quietly, may I come in? No response. Janus took a deep breath. He didn't know how to deal with upset children. He tried to keep the exasperation from his voice so he wouldn't accidentally snap at the kid. Virgil, it's my job to take care of you, and that includes getting you to eat. Please, can you open the door? I brought food. His efforts were met with silence. Janus heaved a sigh. Can you at least give me a sign that you're still in there and you haven't run away? A soft thud met his ears when something hit the door. Thank you, Janus said. He wanted to ask again if he could enter, but he didn't want to push his limits. I'll leave the plate outside your door in case you want to eat later. He didn't receive a response, so he just set the plate on the floor. He looked at the door, tempted to make another effort to somehow connect with this kid, but he figured Virgil likely wouldn't even want to see him. Janus walked back to the hall and shouldered open the door to his own room. He flicked on the lights, and a soft yellow light glowed from the lamps in the corners of his room. While his bed looked very inviting, with its soft comforter and too many pillows, he had to get ready for bed before he actually crawled into it. After brushing his teeth and having a quick shower, quick as in about 30 minutes long, he left the bathroom and flopped onto his bed. This had certainly been a long day. It was still quite early in the night, but DW was right. He did need his rest. But first, he had to figure out what to do about these kids. He picked up his suit jacket and rummaged through the pockets for the letter Patton had given him. He scooted back so he was leaning against his headboard, and he grabbed a pillow and hugged it to his chest as he flipped open the envelope again. He sifted through the papers Patton had tucked inside. He set the first one aside, the one he'd already read that asked Janus to watch the kids. The third paper was just a list of phone numbers. Janus would have to do some vigorous background checks on these people before he even considered calling them. He turned to the page that held information on the kids. He grabbed a throw blanket from the edge of his bed and draped it around his shoulders, settling into bed as if he were about to start reading a novel. Janus, here's some general information on my kiddos and how to take care of them. I know you're a little inexperienced with caring for kids, and my kiddos can be a little different from most, so I figured I'd give you a bit of advice. Roman is very emotional. Please don't snap at him if you can help it. He'll probably start crying if shouted at. If he's doing something he shouldn't be, please try to work it out with him without getting angry. Remus has a bad knee that never healed properly. He can't walk or run for long, and stairs are a problem. Virgil can carry him, but please be patient with them. Remus also has OCD. It's undiagnosed because I don't want any legal records connecting them to me, so therapists haven't been an option, but their tutor/counselor has confirmed that a lot of the symptoms match up. If he does anything out of the ordinary, like triple checking that the lights are shut off, that's normal for him. We've been working on keeping him from relying on those habits, but if you see him doing anything, don't stop him. Making him ignore it makes things worse. It's a long process, and some of the progress we've made will go backwards. Be patient with him, please. Virgil has anxiety and autism, also undiagnosed. He has panic attacks, meltdowns, and shutdowns often. He cries a lot during meltdowns and sometimes screams. I know you're familiar with this, but I'll say it anyway. Don't try to restrain him during a meltdown. It's similar for panic attacks, but he gets scared and might hyperventilate. In that case, physical touch can be comforting, but ask first. If you're going outside with him, make sure he has his headphones. Also, he might not eat unfamiliar food, so if it's not too much trouble, try asking him what he wants to eat. He knows some of the recipes I use, and cooking helps calm him down, so try cooking with him. I know you don't adjust well to change, but I didn't know who else to turn to. Thank you for taking care of my kiddos. If you need any more information, call their tutor, Logan Minder. He can help. Good luck and thank you. Patton. Janus stared at the last small paragraph. Logan. Patton knew Logan. And Logan was the tutor of these kids? That was unexpected, to say the least. Everything else Janus had either already assumed or was fully prepared to help with, but Logan? How did he know Patton? Janus turned to the page with a list of phone numbers. He scanned it, and there he saw what he was looking for. Logan's name and phone number was scribbled between the number for the kid's drama instructor and the one for Patton's niece. Janus read through each digit to make sure it matched perfectly with the number he had in his contacts. Sure enough, it was Logan's number. Janus grabbed his phone from where he'd set it on the nightstand and went to his contacts. He brought up Logan's number and pressed the call button. He held his phone to his ear, waiting for him to pick up. Nothing. Janus canceled the call. He tossed his phone to his bed and rested his chin on the pillow he was hugging. It seemed Logan was too busy to pick up at the moment. Janus would have to sort through this issue tomorrow. He heard footsteps outside his door as DW went to her room. It was only just past 9. Still early, but it had been a long day for everyone. He might as well go to sleep. He stood and walked across the room to the light switch. Before he could turn them off, however, someone knocked at his door. Janus jumped at the sound, but he shook off his surprise. He made a detour to the door. Pushing down his mild annoyance, he opened it. Roman and Remus stood there, both glancing from Janus to the floor. Remus stood a little behind Roman, as if using his brother as a shield. Both wore pajama pants, Roman's red and Remus's green, with a t-shirt in the other twins' respective color. Can I help you? Janus asked. Remus nudged Roman. Roman looked up at Janus and gulped. Sorry for bugging you, but Remus wants to know if the doors are locked and if you're going to turn off the lights when you're done. Janus hadn't been expecting this either, but at least now he knew why Remus was asking. DW would have locked the doors when she was finished with the dishes, and yes, I will turn off my light when I go to sleep. Remus leaned forward and whispered something to Roman. Can we go check if they're locked? Roman asked. Janus tried not to get frustrated at the interruption to his nightly routine, but he stepped out of his room and flicked off the lights. Of course. He walked with the kids to the stairs. Remus held up his arms, and Janus took that as a signal to help. He picked Remus up and walked downstairs, Roman clinging to Remus's shirt like he had before. They entered the dining room. Remus made no move to wriggle out of Janus's arms, so Janus continued to carry him through the room and into the hall. Who would have thought that Janus Chimera, leader of one of the biggest crime rings in the southern half of the United States, would be wandering his own house at night in his pajamas with a scared child in his arms? Anyone from Chimera who saw him like this would claim he'd gone soft. They went down the hall towards the back door. Janus hefted Remus to one arm and leaned down to make sure it was locked. Sure enough, it was. DW never forgot to lock the doors. Roman stepped forward and tried to turn the knob. It didn't budge. "Looks like this one's locked," Janus said. Remus nodded to show he understood. Janus turned and walked back to the hall towards the front door, Roman in tow. Janus made sure it was locked, and Roman checked to make sure it couldn't be opened. "We'll check the door on the balcony, too," Janus told the kids. "No one could get in through there, but DW always locks it anyway." Well, the part about knowing being able to get in through there wasn't exactly true. Agents from Chimera had scaled the building before and knocked on the balcony doors to ask for help before, which was the sole reason DW had started locking them in the first place. They didn't need any late-night visitors. Besides, if uninvited Chimera agents could get in, Wrath agents could get in, and the last thing Janus wanted was to wake up to a gun to his head. However, he didn't want to tell that to the kids. They walked back up the stairs, and Janus made a beeline for the balcony doors. Roman scurried after him in the dark hallway. They stopped at the doors, and Janus leaned down to check the lock, but he paused when something outside the window caught his eye. Outside on the balcony, a dark shape that looked vaguely like a person was sprawled out on the floor. A bolt of panic shot through Janus. He set Remus down and gently pushed both him and Roman away from the doors. "Remus, it appears there's someone on the balcony. I'm going to need one of you to tell DW. She should be in her room." The twins exchanged identical looks of fear. They ran off hand in hand to the hallway, shooting occasional glances back at Janus and the doors. Janus turned the lock on the doors. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for a possible attack, and pushed the doors open. When he didn't get immediately run through with a knife, he allowed himself a moment to survey the situation. A grappling hook was latched over the railing of the balcony, the end of the rope attached lying discarded on the ground. The person on the ground looked as if they collapsed as soon as they climbed over the railing. Janus lowered his guard when he saw the yellow two-headed snake printed on the back of their leather jacket, but his anxiety shot up again when he saw the blood leaking from their torso onto the balcony floor. He could just barely make out the person's features in the dim moonlight. They appeared to be a white person with dark hair and glasses, and a striped blue necktie stood out against their black polo shirt. Oh, God. Janus rushed forward and knelt next to the man. "Logan, what happened to you?" He received no response. Janus gently cupped Logan's face. "Logan, darling, please answer. What happened? How long have you been here?" Footsteps ran towards him, and he looked back to see DW rushing for the balcony, wearing a tank top and a pair of shorts, revealing the prosthetic that replaced her right leg. She clutched a pocket knife in her hands and stared at Janus and Logan with wide eyes. Roman and Remus stood behind her, those fearful looks still on their faces. Remus's attention flickered back and forth between Logan's body on the balcony and DW's prosthetic leg. DW lowered the knife when she saw what was happening. "Holy shit, what happened to him?" "I don't know," Janus whispered, fear for Logan rising in his chest. "He isn't responding." Logan's body lurched as a cough expelled from his throat. He wheezed in a breath and coughed again. Janus put a hand on Logan's back, the other still cupping his cheek as Logan hacked. Logan's expression twisted into one of pain. He pulled away from Janus to spit on the balcony. A glob of blood splattered on the floor. Blood trickled down his chin, and Janus wiped it away with his thumb. "Logan, honey, what happened?" Janus repeated softly. He gently rubbed Logan's back in an attempt to comfort. He was painfully aware of the feeling of the leather jacket on his ungloved hand. He grit his teeth at the sensation, but did his best to ignore it. Logan's chest heaved. One blood-covered hand clutched his side, and the other reached up to straighten his glasses. "Nothing," he rasped. "Just the usual. It's just a scratch." Janus rolled his eyes at Logan's words. "Well, it's not like you're bleeding out on my balcony, darling. Seriously, what the hell did you do?" Logan swallowed. "Just ran into a gang. Weren't too happy to see me, hacking into their cameras. It's nothing. I can walk it off." "Of course you can walk off what looks like a gunshot wound, dear. I absolutely don't doubt that you could. Now, how long have you been here?" Logan didn't respond for a few minutes, and Janus began to fear that he'd passed out. "Dunno," Logan slurred. "Maybe 5 minutes?" He stared at Janus through his glasses. "You're really pretty, Jan." That's the blood loss talking, dear. Janus looked up at DW. Can you already on it? She ran back into the house. Roman and Remus stayed in the doorway, staring at Logan in confusion. Specs? Remus muttered. What are you doing here? Logan turned his gaze to the twins. He didn't speak for a solid 10 seconds. Wait, you're Pat's kids. What are you... It's a long story, Janus said. He brushed Logan's hair away from his face. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. I'll explain everything as soon as you're well enough to hear it. Logan mumbled something incoherent. The blood loss was certainly getting to him. DW hurried back onto the balcony with a first aid kit. Leave him to me, Jan. Get the kids back into bed. You can deal with this in the morning. Janus nodded. He looked down at Logan and wiped another stream of blood off his lips. Will you be okay with DW, darling? Logan mumbled something else Janus couldn't decipher. He pressed a kiss to Janus's thumb as it passed over his mouth. That was a sure sign that Logan was slowly becoming delirious. He always got affectionate when he wasn't in his right mind. Janus stood, ignoring Logan's grumbles of protest. Janus put a hand on the twins' shoulders and guided them back into the house. He'll be fine. DW will lock the door as soon as she's finished. Are you sure? Remus asked. Yes. Now, you both need your rest. We're leaving before 9 tomorrow morning, so I can go to work. Janus looked back at Logan's bloody form on the balcony as he led the kids back to their room. The mystery of how Logan knew the Hart family would have to wait until tomorrow, it seemed. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series. If you want to check out other podfics I've done, you can click on the playlist linked on the screen. See you next time!